Melee weapons come with a unique mod slot, the stance slot. For a lot of players, these just seem like a place to put a curiously named mod to gain some more modding capacity. But stance mods do a lot more than that and can seriously change the effectiveness of your melee weapon. I'm going to go over just what these stances do for you, what makes stances different, and what's arguably the best stance for every category. I'm the Engineer, let's solve a practical problem. For this topic, I will only consider PvE stances for normal gameplay. There are additional stances which are Conclave specific, but I imagine the 10 people playing Conclave probably know which ones to use. Firstly then, what does a stance do for you? It gives you three things. First, it adds capacity to your melee weapon. If the polarity of the stance mod matches your weapon's stance polarity, you get double the benefit. But if the polarity doesn't match, you get a reduced benefit. As you should always be max ranking your stance mods, that's going to be 10 or 4 extra capacity depending on if the mod does or doesn't match. Secondly, the stance will give you new combos you can perform with the weapon. This allows you to attack with different styles, changing how fast you hit and where you hit. Sometimes this even allows you to hit enemies behind you. And then the third thing is that it changes the amount of damage you deal and the status procs you apply with each of your hits. That last one is both very important and, because it's Warframe, rather complicated. When you combine together different damage multipliers, different number of hits, different ways of hitting, and even different combo durations, you can see there's a lot of moving parts. If you had a look in game, you'd be forgiven for thinking that stances really don't differ that much at all. Applying a stance reveals this enticing combos button, only to be met with a series of meaningless names and some unexplained movesets. So here on my Nikana Prime, we can see the Decisive Judgment stance gives us moves including Swift Retribution, Windless Cuts, and so on. If I swap instead to Blind Justice, the top 4 combos change. For all melee weapons, your stance only changes these top 4 combos. These 4 combos then, as provided by your stances, are the Neutral, Moving, Moving Block, and Blocking combos. Neutral is when you press melee attack while you're just stood still. Moving is the attack when you hold just forwards and press attack. Moving block is when you hold both aim and forwards at the same time before attacking. And blocking is when you hold only aim when attacking. You can force your character to hold your melee weapon when aiming by holding down the switch weapon button. And if you press that button again, you'll switch back to your guns. The combos all have a discrete number of moves before they loop. For example, on Guiding Light, the top left combo here for Blind Justice, we've got 5 instances of E, my melee attack key. To perform the full combo, I would need to press melee attack 5 times in sequence. Now Warframe will only queue one action at a time, so spamming E 5 times won't do the full combo. Instead, each move must be pressed during the preceding one to continue that specific combo. If I just spam E 5 times over, I'll perform the first attack, I'll queue the second attack, and then the other 3 key presses will just keep replacing that second attack, meaning I only do 2 attacks. For some reason, when it comes to the heavy attack combo, like Windless Cuts here, it only shows 1 input for the combo. Despite this, every heavy attack combo actually has 2 different moves in the combo before repeating, not just 1. Now beyond knowing how many moves are in a combo, the game will tell you nothing more about what's going on and why you should pick one stance over another. Thankfully, other players have already researched every stance and every move, as well as where to actually get the stance mod, putting all that information onto the wiki. This is where we can see just how much the game is doing without telling you. The wiki shows how many strikes are involved in each move, how much damage those strikes deal, and any forced status procs they deal, as well as if the move is entirely a slam or 360 attack. Taking once again Blind Justice, the Nikana stance, we see that the Guiding Light neutral combo has 5 moves, just as shown in game. The first 2 moves both have 1 strike each, one of them dealing 300% damage with a forced impact proc, whilst the second deals just 200% damage. The following 3 moves all have 2 attacks each, so that's a pair of 200% damage strikes, another pair of 200% damage strikes, and then finally a 200% strike with 4 slash, followed by a 400% strike with a knockdown on the targets. You can see here how this compares against the Decisive Judgment stance, where its neutral combo delivers fewer attacks in the same amount of time, with a lower average damage multiplier per second. Now while this may not look the simplest, this is the shorthand way of looking at the moves in combos. For some reason, DE added a bunch of additional non-standard modifiers to almost every stance on top of this though. Sometimes these will be tiny, like an extra 25% impact damage on a hit. Other times it could be a full 100% extra slash. Again, the wiki has these details in its own section below the stance table if you want to pore over those extra details. For those of you who don't want to go through all those crazy details, let's have a simple breakdown of which stance will be the best all round for each weapon category. All of this is going to be based on practical testing on top of the numbers here, but your mileage will vary and I'm sure many people will have their own preference. For some categories, the correct stance is the only stance you have. Blade and whips, rapiers, two-handed nikanas, the ghoul saw and nunchakus all only have one stance to pick from. For every other category, I would recommend these stances listed here. Some suggestions here matter more than others. For glaives, gunblades and warfans, the stance doesn't really matter as they all perform a lot better with heavy attacks than they do with the normal combos. On the other end of the spectrum, the stances I'm showing for daggers, dual daggers, staves, swords, sword and shields, tonfas and whips are the best in category by a significant margin. Of course, picking the right stance to get the most out of your weapon is only half the battle. You also need to pick up the right weapon, and the weapon categories are very far from equal. That's why you should check out this next video comparing almost every melee type in the game when using these normal attack combos. You might be surprised as to just how far apart some weapon categories are. That's all from me for now though, and as always, apply stances, use combos, and fight well, Tenno.